is that it transforms the world around you. The world for each of us is different, and this isn't a nice way of putting it, saying that hey, we have our personal differences. No, our brain without receptors would be in complete isolation. And it's been found that the thalamus creates this story for itself of what the environment would be. Then it gets feedback from the senses, and through those feedback, you fine tune the world around you. And the way that you fine tune this, you have certain senses, they cover a certain spectrum. For example, the same goes with the light and your vision, right? You see a very tiny amount of the possible spectrum, and this means that you perceive the world as you do right now, with colors, with everything else. It's fascinating the fact that you cannot properly talk, you cannot properly do anything without interjecting with your medium. For example, try to put a baby. Please don't do that because it's horrible, it's not ethical, and yeah, don't do it. But if you don't allow a baby to move while he's trying to speak, he will never be able to develop um, his or her propensity for speech, right? There are certain things hard coded in us which allow us to showcase those traits, such as speech. But in the absence of movement, if you would restrain somebody, you wouldn't be able to speak. The same goes with vision, and this has actually been tested on two poor kittens, and one of them was restrained and the other wasn't when they were exploring the world in a certain setting, right? And the kitten who was restrained because he needed movement in order to position himself in the world, he couldn't see correctly the world around him. And once the formation period is over, it's very difficult to adapt otherwise. We've seen brain plasticity, we've seen people who lost their vision and then after an operation, many years after, are able to see again. It's extremely hard for them to adapt to what they're seeing or to understand what they're seeing because they are getting the sensory input, but their brain doesn't necessarily have how to decode it, right? The brain regions that were supposed to be involved in the vision have been meanwhile adapted to some other tasks, and in many cases it's either the touch or the smell or the hearing, right? Because you've seen this kind of pop sensey thing that if you lose one sense you develop the others more, and that's correct because they tend to get more of the area in your brain in which that part is decoded, right? So the most mind-blowing thing for me that it's still very very difficult to wrap my hand around is that the world doesn't have a sound, it doesn't have a smell. It has smell for us due to the receptors in our nose. It has a sound because of the way that we perceive the different waves, right? This is the reason why you can understand me, because you have a human ear that functions in a certain way. That's why I believe one of the most beautiful ways of putting white music is the noise between the silence. I think it's a very approximate code, but the idea stays. It's fascinating because you cannot imagine world, you cannot imagine reality. This for me is mind blowing. When I started my let's say adventure in neuroscience, I came through trying to figure out myself and then through going to psychology, and then I discovered that actually another clinical part interests me, but rather than the research, and the research was in the area of the brain, right? So this is how I got into the whole philosophy of mind and neuroscience thing. I got first into the neuroscience part, and I understood that maybe biology is not the end all be all. Maybe because see, it's like this. We assume that we can explain what the brain does. So this is a materialist view. We can explain what the brain does solely through understanding its biology. We understand its biology by understanding its chemistry, right? Because there are molecules, and they interact in a certain way that gives you biology. And then the molecules interact because of physics. So you'd have physics underlying chemistry, which underlies biology, which underlies the whole system. And that was my belief for a long time, and it's the general belief in the science field, and it's very hard to find somebody who believes in a non-reductionist view or an emergent view, a view that says that, hey, from some systems such as neurons, at some point something else emerges, right? It's something that I'm working on, that I'm passionate about, that I'm trying to understand better, and we won't dive into it. But again, the fact that we see the world, and when I say see, I mean we sense the world in its entirety, so much different one from the other. Nobody's perceiving the same thing. No, so we all know that there is a genetic mutation in some of the women, and they can see more colors than men, and it's, I think, in a quarter of women. I might be misquoting. I believe it's either 10% or 25%. But anyway, it's a large, not non-negligible um, size of population, then can see more colors than the rest of us, right? And you can have synesthesia as, again, a fascinating phenomena where somebody tells you that things that shouldn't be associated are. And it's, again, this is another way that the world is completely different from for those people. They will always associate a color with the sound, or the, for example, the days of the week. This is a very, very common one, right? You associate Wednesday with brown or with purple. For me, it doesn't make sense. I cannot imagine it. And I go back to Nagel's, what it's like to be a bat. Are we sure we know what it's like to be a human? I mean, I know what it's like to be me, and then I go back to Descartes, but obviously I don't want that because, I mean, okay, Descartes is, everybody's talking about him, but I wish he ever went into a neuroscience lab, right? But he put us on a nice track. But that's the whole idea. Like, it's very difficult while studying these things to think in anything that's immaterial that can be happening, but it's also extremely difficult to support the case that there isn't something that's emergent, right? So it's extremely fascinating to me. But back to the topic of this video, I've had some falling out with people, and I've had many times in my life when I didn't understand what they meant, and this is why it helps you. This is why maybe it's useful to watch this video if you've watched it to this point. They don't mean it. They don't mean to aggravate you or to say anything bad to you. It's just the way they see the world. We see the world different. So you, the person that's listening to me, you weren't been born, raised, had the similar circumstances as myself. Each person, each brain is different at the level of synapses. Why? Because of the events that has formed the brain. So we form synapses through different events that we encounter in our life that get stored as memories or whatnot. And I mean, this is a very simplistic way of explaining, so I'm sorry if I'm angering anybody. The idea with synapses is that they obviously get more strong when you do a task repeatedly, right? So, and by the way, for Einstein, like he was a violinist, so one part of his brain that's been known to be more developed for violinists has been shown after his death that it was there, that there is a change in the brain structure, in neuroplasticity, but not all the changes in the brain are that visible, right? If you're a pianist, if you're a violinist, if you use like your hands a lot and you have high dexterity, you will find that indeed your brain would have a different structure. But for most of us, we tend to have quite a similar structure, but the synapses for all of us are different. So each individual is very different from one to the other, and the fact that they didn't understand me, those people, and that I didn't understand them, it's It's just a limitation of the way that we're seeing the world, a limitation of us. It's the way of dealing with it. It's having, of course, having empathy, but also realizing that if the worldview is that dissimilar and that different, like I cannot put myself in the shoes of somebody who, for example, lived in Australia, maybe on a ranch or a farm for his entire life. Um, I've lived in either UK or Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe, like 90% of my life. So for me, that's my reality. I'm not the same as a person who has lived in the UK or in the Western Europe, and that's normal. That's fair, and we have to realize the fact that first of all, none of us is wrong. We have different ways of looking at the world, and it's fascinating because that's not just us saying that, oh, we're different. No, we do have the neurobiology to back that. We all know that our life experiences shape us, but up to the point that the world becomes different for each of us that's perceiving things. And for example, it has been the experience with a Russian scientist in the 60s, where he put people to look at a painting, right? And they would look at this painting that has a lot of elements in it, and they would look at it, but they would not see the details. They would only see the big picture. So our brain has a very, very high level point of view of anything that's happening, and that's because 80% of our attention is right in like the middle of our focus, and then you get like the peripheral view, which is of a much lesser quality, and then you do have some blind spots as well. By the way, you don't see um, a blank in your view. Like our brain creates this reality that seems continuous for us, but if you would ever stop to think, like even the way that we're seeing things, the movement is not continuous. It's very fragmented, of course, in very tiny amounts of time. And the fact that now, for example, you're looking at me, okay, and if I do this, you're gonna probably see and hear the sound in the same time, unless there is some delay due to the video. But actually, one of them inside our brain gets processed much later. Like the visual stimuli is processed later than the auditory stimuli, but our brain still matches the view to the sound, right? So um, yeah, it's fascinating. It's up for the debate, up for more exploration, up for more let's say research papers, more of us understanding how things work, but also seeing things from a perspective that's not as keen on finding only the needs and the small and the bits and pieces. It's also on finding how those systems work together, which is, I think, it's sort of lacking in modern science. But anyway, that was mind blowing for me. It's mind blowing that we're. It's stupid to say it's mind blowing that we're not the same, because we all know that up to a point, right? But if you have like heart to heart and good conversations with good people, you might find out at some point that you really cannot comprehend what they're saying. You cannot comprehend, you cannot understand them. And you can say, okay, it's due to the values. Okay, fine. That's also a function of experiences and the function of your neurobiology, right? The fact that I cannot understand the person, even if we both have the best interests in mind, may not be because we're bad people. It's just that we are so different in the way that we perceive the world. For me, something might be absolutely normal. For somebody else, might be completely out of line. Jaywalking is a good example, right? For me, that's second nature. Okay, so yeah, okay, fine. I stopped doing it when I was old enough to understand I'm giving a bad example to the world. But typically for us, jaywalking, as I'm sure it's true for lots of other countries, like I've spoken with friends from, I know that in Asia it's something that's quite common. Other than, I don't think in Singapore, but for example in India it's common. So yeah, that's the thing. Things are common in many places, right? So we become accustomed to it. But if you go to a country like, I think, Netherlands, in Netherlands nobody would jaywalk, or there are even stricter countries like that, but that kind of comes to my mind. People would be just waiting there, and you don't understand the model of the world. You don't understand their views, and this is just a very minor example. There are so many things that's different. They're a function of our family, a function of our education, a function of our culture, a function of our life events, a function of our genes. I mean, all of those, they're all predicated, and they are built upon our genes. Everything is built upon the biology, because if the biology isn't there, I mean, yeah, it's, you can put a pin on it, it's done. But what the biology does, it gives you a propensity for certain things, right? It doesn't put you on a straight path to something unless you're talking about like gene deletion, something that's uh, which is typically associated with different syndromes, or some issues with genes that are translating into medical conditions, right? Those things are they're something else, right? It's fascinating, but the biology typically allows for multiple, let's say, realizabilities. Man, what a word. You can realize multiple things, but you eventually tend to realize one of them due to your experiences and all of the things that I said, like your life, your family, culture, whatever, blah blah blah, education, and so on and so forth, right? So, fascinating stuff. That's why we're hard to predict, I think. We're hard to predict because nobody else other than ourselves knows our full life, our both inner and outer life, because I do consider that we do have an inner life. This is a disputed view, by the way. Um, but yeah, it's, again, mind blowing, fascinating. Just think of the fact that your brain is in complete isolation, and everything that you form around yourself is through the brain creating a model of the world, plus your uh, plus the sensorial input that it receives, the light that I get from outside, the fact that I'm hearing my own voice, the fact that I'm touching my hands, the fact that I'm sitting on a desk with my elbow, all those things at every point in my life, I have this I forgot how they're called, but in the muscles you have I don't want to say it wrong, but it's neurosensorial things. Anyway, you always know what's the position of your muscles and how much tension is in your muscles, right? So you're always aware, your body is always aware of that. There are actually diseases that can affect it, and it makes living extremely complicated. Like, imagine not knowing how where your hands are positioned in space, or your legs, right? But guess what? You cannot imagine it because you just cannot. So back to Nagel's thing. What's like to be a bat? Man, what's like to be a human? What's like to be a different human? I don't think we know. I don't think we're close to figuring that out. So I guess the answer is empathy. The answer is, I guess, forgiveness, because sometimes I think that's actually a very good message. Empathy is not always the key. Sometimes it's good to just realize, hey, no matter what, we're not gonna be compatible on the same views. Like, I will never be compatible with a person who's very much on the right spectrum or very much on the left spectrum, right? So people who I typically don't agree with, right? So I will never understand their worldview, and I'm open to that, and I'm saying, fine, fair enough. And if in case I act badly towards them, it's not because I mean to or I want to, it's because that's my understanding of the world. So, and the same goes for them. So I think the best thing to be is, of course, empathy. Where that fails, it's forgiveness. It's forgiveness because, again, you will find people in your life that will tell you things that you cannot comprehend. Like, no matter how much you try, no matter how open minded you are, no matter how much kindness you have, or how much you care for that person, you will never understand some of their life choices. And that's okay. It's not for you to understand, it's for you to move on. To have empathy, to be fine, and if you harm them, maybe they can forgive you. If they harm you, maybe you can forgive them, as long as there is no malice involved. So if it's no malice involved, we should understand that, hey man, we're just different, we're doing our best, I guess. Sometimes our best isn't good, I'm not hiding from that. Sometimes our best is horrendous, but I think the key is to try to have an understanding of what a person can do at its best and what a person can do at its worst. And while it's very good to have boundaries and to walk away from a person who's maybe at its worst or whatever, or who has done something terrible from you, just realize I would say it's not worth it. It's not, targeted at you most of the times. Again, assuming there is no malice, there is no hatred, there is nothing there negatively. If that person does something that you're completely in disagreement with, um, yeah, I don't know. I can give you more examples. I don't want to milk too much this cow, and I don't want to offend anybody. So um, maybe it's something that you're completely in disagreement with, and you know that no matter what, you're not gonna accept that. It's a good thing for you to go and to say, hey, I forgive that person for acting that way. And you don't even have to say that to that person. You just, you stick your boundaries, you leave, and you understand that for them it's nothing wrong. It's their view of the world, and maybe you don't have the right view. Nobody knows what the right view is. Nobody knows what's right or what's wrong, and we have ethics to try and find the way of that. But yeah, we're not in practice. Kant's absolutism kind of feels like I'm very close to him, to an absolutist view. Like something is wrong typically in most situations, but definitely you cannot apply absolutism to the real world. So that's where ethics fails as well. Yeah. So with that in mind, thanks for listening. I'm hoping that you got something out of my rambling. It's been a fun time exploring this topic. I aim to explore it for at least a few more years. Um, if you have questions, if I can help in any way, reach out to me. Don't try to reach out on strangers or on the internet first. Try to talk with somebody who's certified if you're struggling with different things. I think that everybody should mention that at some point in their videos or whatever they're doing. So there are people who you should reach out first. But yeah, for sure, if you do have questions and if you think that I can answer to anything, I'm happy to provide any sort of research back things. And by the way, research can be wrong. It has been proven so many times. We can have a huge oversight of things. We can be like in the wrong in so many ways, even if we think that we have the facts. So yeah, everything is relative, I guess. And yeah, it's tough, man. It's a tough world to comprehend and to live in, and it's because we were typically accustomed to way less connections that we are in this world right now, and we have to be aware of so many people in so many places in so many ways, and we're so different. Because if you were in your band, in your tribe, like 10,000 years ago, people would be quite similar in their experiences and in their life, but now you're meeting with people that you cannot understand their point of view, and I've met wonderful people and I just couldn't comprehend their worldview. I've met people who were like in awe at at a specific thing that was happening in my country, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? That's actually kind of trash." And I realized that I didn't see their point of view. I didn't see their perspective at all. For them, it was something that was wonderful, and I gained a new appreciation of that. But this doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's impossible to understand them, but always empathy is very hard. But yeah, even when we're not, we should have forgiveness for ourselves, forgiveness for the others, and very good boundaries. Just to stay. I don't think conflict helps us. I think, I mean, I'm a fan of Sapolsky and of his own his work on stress. I do believe conflict and modern divergent opinions, they're good to a certain point, but once you formed an opinion on something, why listen to something else? Maybe sometimes it's better to just stay away from certain subjects. I've chosen, for example, on my own to stay away from many subjects like that I really never want to discuss. Um, it's a boundary, okay? We our life is supposed to have boundaries, and with that in mind, thank you for listening. I hope you're doing great. I hope you're getting what you need, and yeah, we'll see each other maybe next year. Who knows? But yeah, we'll hear each other again soon. Bye.